My father chose my reckless brother over me and fired me without even looking at the evidence. What followed wasn't anger. It was one of those revenge stories built on patience, power, and family betrayal, where revenge and justice don't come with screaming, they come with board votes and ownership papers.
"You are incompetent, Aaliyah, and you are fired," my father sneered, tossing my life's work into a cardboard box to make room for my reckless brother. He thought he was discarding a liability, but he was actually handing me the motivation to build a rival empire that would one day swallow his whole. That sentence replayed in my mind every single morning for 3 years. It was the alarm clock that woke me up at 4 a.m. It was the fuel that kept me going when I was surviving on instant coffee and sheer spite. But to understand why that moment shattered me and why the revenge was so sweet, you have to understand what Rogers Global was and who I was within it. My name is Aaliyah Rogers, and Rogers Global was a logistics behemoth. My grandfather built it with a single truck. My father, Robert Rogers, expanded it into a regional powerhouse. But I was the one who dragged it into the 21st century. I started working there when I was 16, filing papers in the basement during my summer breaks. By 25, I had an MBA and a vision. I saw that the company was bleeding money through outdated routing systems and bloated middle management. For 7 years, I was the COO in everything but title. I was the one sleeping on the couch in the executive suite during the holiday rushes. I was the one negotiating with unions to prevent strikes. I was the one who implemented the automated tracking software that saved the company $12 million in its first year alone. My father took the credit for all of it. I didn't mind. I thought I was paying my dues. I thought I was securing my legacy. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I made him proud enough, the company would eventually be mine to steer. Then there was Caleb. Caleb was my younger brother by 4 years. He was the golden boy, the son, the heir apparent who had never worked a real day in his life. While I was analyzing supply chain logistics, Caleb was backpacking through Europe on the company credit card, finding himself. When he finally decided to join the family business, he didn't start in the mailroom. He started as the vice president of strategy. His strategy usually involved 3 martini lunches and trying to date the interns. The incident that ended my career at Rogers Global wasn't even my fault. It was Caleb's. We were bidding for a massive government contract, the kind that secures a company's future for a decade. I had spent months preparing the proposal. Every decimal point was checked, every compliance regulation met. 2 days before the presentation, Caleb decided the proposal wasn't flashy enough. Without telling me, he went into the server and altered the pricing model. He thought he was being clever, undercutting the competition by a margin that was mathematically impossible.
He didn't understand operating costs. He didn't understand fuel surcharges. He just wanted to look like the hero who landed the big fish. When we presented to the government officials, they laughed us out of the room. They pointed out that at Caleb's proposed numbers, we would be bankrupt within 6 months. It was humiliating. I stormed into my father's office an hour later, ready to demand that Caleb be removed from any decision-making roles. I had the server logs. I had the proof that Caleb had tampered with my work. But when I walked in, Caleb was already there. He was pouring my father a scotch, looking solemn. My father looked at me with a coldness that froze the air in my lungs. He didn't ask for my side. He didn't look at the evidence I was clutching in my shaking hand. He told me that Caleb had explained everything. He said that I had panicked, dropped the prices to try and impress the board, and now I was trying to pin my incompetence on my brother to save my own skin. I tried to speak. I tried to show him the logs. That was when he delivered the line. "You are incompetent, Aaliyah, and you are fired." He didn't just fire me, he erased me. Security escorted me out. My company email was deactivated before I reached the elevator. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to the team I had built, the people I had mentored. The next day, a press release went out. It was brief. It stated that Aaliyah Rogers was leaving to pursue personal interests, implying a mental breakdown. It cleared the path for Caleb Rogers to step up as the new chief operating officer. I spent the first month in a daze. I barely left my apartment. I watched the business news channels as my father and Caleb gave interviews about the new direction of Rogers Global. They were pivoting, they said. They were going to be disruptors. It hurt. It hurt physically, like a hollow ache in the center of my chest. I had given that man my life, my loyalty, and my love, and he threw me away because I wasn't the son he wanted. But sadness eventually curdles into anger, and anger, if you refine it, becomes ambition. I realized I had something they didn't. They had the infrastructure, the trucks, the warehouses, but I had the brain. I knew where the bodies were buried. I knew the inefficiencies they hadn't fixed yet. And most importantly, I knew that Caleb was going to drive that company off a cliff. I took my savings, every penny I had stashed away from my salary, and I started a new company. I called it AR Logistics. I didn't have a fleet of trucks. I didn't have a massive headquarters. I worked out of a shared co-working space that smelled like stale coffee and desperation.
My plan wasn't to compete with Rogers Global directly. I couldn't. They were a whale and I was a plankton. Instead, I decided to become the parasite that ate the whale from the inside out. I focused on tech. I built a proprietary AI-driven platform that optimized last-mile delivery, the most expensive and complex part of shipping. While Rogers Global was still using dispatchers and spreadsheets, my software was using real-time traffic data and predictive algorithms to route deliveries. The first year was brutal. My father had blacklisted me. Suppliers who'd known me for years wouldn't take my calls. They were afraid of losing the Rogers Global account. I had to scrape for clients. I took the jobs no one else wanted. Hazardous materials, rush orders at 3 a.m. on the Christmas Eve, complex international freight that required mountains of paperwork. I worked 20 hours a day. My social life evaporated. My dating life was non-existent. I was a woman possessed. But slowly, the tide began to turn. Mid-size companies started noticing that AR Logistics was faster, cheaper, and more reliable than the giants. We didn't lose packages. We didn't miss deadlines. And unlike Rogers Global, when a client called us, they spoke to a human being who actually knew what was going on. By the end of year 2, we had secured our first major contract with a regional retailer. It wasn't huge, but it was steady. Meanwhile, over at Rogers Global, the cracks were starting to show. I still had friends on the inside, lower-level managers, IT guys, secretaries, people my father and brother ignored because they didn't think they mattered. They became my spies. We would meet for drinks in dive bars 3 towns over, and they would spill everything. Caleb was a disaster. He had fired the veteran dispatchers because he thought they were too old school and replaced them with an app that crashed 3 times a week. He spent millions renovating the executive offices while the delivery fleet fell into disrepair. He ignored union grievances until a wildcat strike cost the company millions in delayed shipments. But the biggest mistake was the merger. In an attempt to look like a titan of industry, Caleb convinced my father to acquire a failing shipping line in Southeast Asia. He claimed it would open up global markets. I knew, just by looking at the public filings, that the Asian company was drowning in debt and legal liabilities. My father, blinded by his desire to see his son succeed, signed the check. It was a poison pill. Rogers Global absorbed the debt. The legal battles started almost immediately. Their stock price, which had been steady for decades, started to wobble. By the start of year 3, AR Logistics was no longer a scrappy startup. We were a serious contender in the tech logistics space. I was being invited to speak at conferences. Forbes did a 30 under 30 feature on me. I made sure to send a copy to my father's office. I never got a reply. Then came the recession scare. The market tightened. Companies started looking to cut costs. The bloat at Rogers Global became fatal. They were bleeding cash. They started missing payments to vendors. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I started meeting with private equity firms. I showed them my numbers. I showed them my growth trajectory. And then I showed them my analysis of Rogers Global. They are a dinosaur, I told a room full of suits in Manhattan. They have assets, warehouses, real estate, grandfathered shipping routes. But management is incompetent. The brand is toxic. I can fix it, but I need capital. I wasn't just asking for investment in my company. I was building a war chest for a hostile takeover. The investors were skeptical at first. Hostile takeovers are messy, but money talks, and my numbers were screaming. I secured the backing. I began buying Rogers Global stock, quietly at first, using shell companies and trusts so my name wouldn't appear on the shareholder registry. As the stock price plummeted due to Caleb's latest scandal, something about dumping waste illegally to save money, I bought more. I bought the debt, too. Rogers Global had taken out massive loans to cover the Asian merger disaster. The banks were nervous. They were happy to sell that debt to a third party at a discount just to get it off their books. I became the creditor. By the time the annual shareholder meeting rolled around, 3 years and 2 months after I was fired, I owned 16% of the stock and held 40% of the company's debt. But the killing blow wasn't financial. It was personal. I received a call from Marcus. Marcus was the CFO of Rogers Global, a man who had worked with my grandfather. He was one of the few who had tried to defend me when I was fired, though he had been silenced by my father. "Aaliyah," he whispered into the phone, "they're filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on Monday. Your father is going to announce it at the shareholder meeting tomorrow. They're going to try to restructure, wipe out the shareholders, and keep control." "Does Caleb know?" I asked. "Caleb is currently on a yacht in the Mediterranean," Marcus sighed. "He's managing remote relations. Robert is alone, Aaliyah. He's ruining the legacy. If they filed Chapter 11, the company will be chopped up and sold for parts. The employees, thousands of them, will lose their pensions." "Get me a guest pass for the meeting, Marcus," I said. "You know I can't do that. Your father has banned you from the premises." "Then get me a proxy," I said. "I'm not coming as a guest, I'm coming as an owner." The shareholder meeting was held in the grand ballroom of the Rogers Global headquarters. It was a somber affair. The room was packed with angry investors, worried employees, and vultures from the press. My father stood at the podium. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him. His suit, usually tailored to perfection, hung loosely on his frame. He was sweating. He began his speech. It was the usual corporate jargon, challenging headwinds, market volatility, unforeseen complications. He was dancing around the truth, refusing to admit that his son had flown the plane into the mountain. He was just about to announce the bankruptcy restructuring plan when I opened the double doors at the back of the room. I wasn't alone. I was flanked by 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits and 2 of my private equity partners. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor echoed through the silent room. Heads turned. Whispers started. "Is that the daughter? I thought she was gone." My father stopped speaking. He squinted against the stage lights. When he recognized me, his face went from pale to a dangerous shade of red. "Security," he barked into the microphone. "Remove this woman. She has no business here." 2 guards started moving toward me. I didn't stop walking. I simply held up a hand, and my lead lawyer, a shark named David, stepped forward. "Mr. Rogers," David projected, his voice booming without a microphone. "Ms. Rogers is the majority representative for the Phoenix Consortium, which currently holds 40% of your company's secured debt. Under the covenants of your loan agreements, which you are currently in default of, she has every right to be here." The room gasped. My father froze. "That's a lie," he stammered. We are in negotiations with the bank." "The bank sold the debt, Robert," I said. My voice was calm, steady. I reached the front row and stood there, looking up at him on the stage. To me, the murmur in the room turned into a roar. Shareholders were standing up, demanding answers. "You can't be here," my father hissed, gripping the podium until his knuckles turned white. "You were fired for incompetence."
I climbed the stairs to the stage. The security guards looked at my father, then at the lawyers, and decided they weren't getting paid enough to intervene. I took the microphone from the stand next to him. 3 years ago, I addressed the crowd, I was removed from this company. I was told I was incompetent. I was told I was a liability. Since then, the leadership of this company has lost 40% of its market value. They have faced 3 class action lawsuits. They have alienated their oldest vendors. I turned to look at my father. Meanwhile, my company, AR Logistics, has grown 300% year over year. We are profitable, we are debt-free, and as of this morning, we have submitted a tender offer to acquire all outstanding shares of Rogers Global at a 20% premium over current market value.
The shareholders went wild. A 20% premium? They were looking at a total loss with the bankruptcy. I was offering them a lifeboat. However, I continued, raising my voice to cut through the noise, this offer is contingent on one condition. The room went silent again. A complete restructuring of the executive board, effective immediately. My father looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. You can't do this, Aaliyah. This is my company. My father built this. I turned off the microphone and leaned in close to him so only he could hear. No, Dad. Grandpa built it. You maintained it, and you let Caleb destroy it because you were too proud to admit that your daughter was the one with the talent. He looked defeated. He's your brother, he whispered. You're going to ruin him. He ruined himself, I said, and you helped him. The vote wasn't even close. The shareholders, desperate to save their investments, voted overwhelmingly to accept my proposal. The board, seeing the writing on the wall, and knowing that I held the debt that could liquidate the company tomorrow, ousted my father as CEO on the spot. The meeting ended in chaos, but it was a controlled chaos. I set up a temporary command center in the boardroom, the same room where I had been fired. About an hour later, the room cleared out. It was just me, reviewing the transition documents. The door opened. My father walked in. He was carrying a box, a cardboard box. He placed it on the mahogany table. It contained a few picture frames, a stapler, and his nameplate. I hope you're happy, he said, his voice trembling. You've embarrassed the family. You've humiliated your brother. Where is Caleb, by the way? I asked, not looking up from the papers. He's flying back. He's distraught. He's fired, I said. I'm dissolving his position. There is no vice president of strategy anymore. If he wants a job, he can apply for a driver position. We're short on CDL holders, but he'll have to pass a drug test. My father slammed his hand on the table. Have you no heart? We are your blood. I finally looked up. I took off my glasses and stared him dead in the eye. You fired me for something I didn't do, I said quietly. You called me incompetent. You stripped me of my shares. You badmouthed me to every competitor in the city to make sure I couldn't get a job. You didn't treat me like blood then, Dad. You treated me like competition. So I became the competition, and I won. He opened his mouth to argue, but the fight had left him. He looked around the office that had been his for 30 years. He looked at me, sitting in the chair he used to occupy. I did it for the family name, he muttered. A Rogers man has always run this company. Well, I said, signing the final document and capping my pen, now a Rogers woman runs it, and unlike the men, she knows how to read a balance sheet. I stood up and walked to the door, holding it open for him. You can keep your pension, Dad. I'm not a monster. But your access to the building is revoked as of 5 p.m. today. Security will escort you out. He picked up his box. He looked small. He walked past me, pausing for a second as if he wanted to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe a curse. But he said nothing. He just walked out into the hallway. I closed the door. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the city. I could see the Rogers Global Distribution Center in the distance, the trucks lining up at the docks. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Caleb. You witch, you can't do this. I blocked the number. The cleanup was messy. Merging the companies took another 2 years. I had to fire a lot of the dead weight Caleb had hired. I had to settle the lawsuits. It was stressful, exhausting work. But 6 months after the takeover, we turned a profit.
1 year later, our stock price surpassed the all-time high set by my grandfather. People ask me if it was worth it, the estrangement from my family, the years of isolation, the sheer amount of work. They ask if I feel guilty about dethroning my own father. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder how things would have been if he had just listened to me that day, if he had just looked at the server logs, if he had just valued me as much as he valued his reckless son. We could have built this together. But then I remember the look on his face when he called me incompetent. I remember the cardboard box he tossed my life into, and I look around at my empire. I look at the thousands of employees whose jobs I saved. I look at the innovation we're driving. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Because in the end, my father was right about one thing. He said he was discarding a liability. He just didn't realize that the liability was Caleb, and the asset he threw away was the only thing that could save him. I didn't just buy a company, I bought my dignity back, and I paid for it with his ego. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to run, and this time, nobody is going to tell me I don't belong in the room.